This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the April 8th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. We've got an exciting weekend of racing to talk about, and we've got some exciting guests to do it with. A little bit later in the show, we're going to have Nick Tammaro on to talk us through some of the public handicapper races this weekend. But we're starting off with a guest who's been on the show before, and we're thrilled to have him back. He's Byron King of the Daily Racing Form, handicapper, reporter extraordinaire, dealing with all things Keeneland at the moment. Byron, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. What an introduction! I wish everybody introduced me that way. That'd be nice.
You've got a lot of responsibilities at Keeneland this week. What are you going to be primarily concerned with? How do you fit into the team down there?
Oh, well, Marty is the big enchilada, Marty McGee. So, no, we tag team it. We're like a wrestling duo, and then, we've been able to, in recent years, we're very lucky to have as part of the DRF team. We've got some DRF breeding folks, Joe and Nicole, that are part of that, and so they team up with us too. And so it's a great thing about Lexington is we've got lots of coverage. So that's great, and it's great meet. I mean, it's just Saturday's just an unbelievable race day there.
You've already talked about how you wear your Lucha Libre mask in terms of your role on Team DRF down in Lexington. Now I'm going to ask you to put on your meteorologist hat. What are we thinking about this weather at Keeneland this weekend? What kind of an effect? I'm not so worried about today. By the time most people listen to this show, today will be underway. They will be knowing what's going on. What are we thinking the conditions are going to be like tomorrow for this big day of racing?
Well, you know what? It's chilly. We're far below the norm. I mean, the norm at this time of year for, the central Kentucky is usually mid-70 or 60. Excuse me. So there's a chance of a freeze overnight, slight chance of showers. Meteorologists love to throw in the idea of a mere snowflake, like it's going to snow or something, you might see one of them, but I don't see a whole lot. They're pretty much calling like 1/10 of an inch, something like that. So I kind of thought handicapping these races ahead of time as we do for the form, I kind of thought we might have a little more chance for an off track or for, something less than firm for the course. But now it's looking like it's pretty probable that I think we're going to have fast and firm tomorrow. It's supposed to be sunny. It's just kind of overnight stuff. And it'll just be chilly at 44 degrees. And, that's a little bit nippy. So, but it should be a good day of racing for sure.
I need you to do me a favor. You got to get them to warm things up down there by the time I arrive on Wednesday night. I'm coming down to hang out for the Grade 1 Gamble handicapping contest next weekend and visit with all my Lexington friends, including you. But I can't be doing 40 degrees. So let's see what we can do about that. All right?
Well, I'm looking long-term forecast and says Wednesday, sunny 58, Thursday, sunny 62. So you're golden, man. You're golden.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. In the 50s, I'm good to go. Mike, I know you had some questions for Byron. Why don't you tee us off here as we start talking about this Saturday card?
Well, I guess, today is opening day at Keeneland. I guess it's officially, from your standpoint, the official beginning of spring. What are you looking for at Keeneland in terms of either the way the track is playing? Are there certain trainers or angles or jockeys or horses that you're excited to keep an eye on and potentially put some money behind? Or are you going to see how things shake out first?
Well, I always like to see. You can't wait to. Naturally, you want to always continuously take input. So, I wouldn't. But at the same time, I'm not going to just sit on my hands first couple days, especially Saturday. It's just an exciting day. But there's a few trends in preparation for this meet. I had to do kind of examine the last few meets on dirt at Keeneland, and just to get a frame of reference as to what wins here and so forth. This is actually, so the Polytrack was replaced. It's been 3 meets now that they've had the dirt in there. It's very fast drying. It's played pretty fairly. It, like most dirt tracks, tactical speed, the ability to be up close is of benefit, but we've seen some races where the pace has melted down and closers have won. So it is what I would call a fair dirt track, typically speaking, but any fair dirt track, I think, is inherently speed biased to some degree. So that's the story there. It has been a highly, over those 3 meets, 41% favorites on dirt. Now that is partially a reflection on the fact that field sizes have been a little shorter than they were during the Polytrack era. That is not so much the case here over the first few days of the meet, which is a very welcome thing that we've seen some really deep fields. Javier Castellano, I would suspect, will be the leading rider in spring. The spring meet is different than the fall meet in that you get more East Coast riders sticking around rather than go up to Aqueduct. You'll see a lot more of Javier Castellano, Johnny V, Jose Buscano. Those guys in the fall aren't around as much. They pretty much stay up at Belmont, and so you don't see them as often. And so that's when you see the Kentucky guys like Blake Peru, Lannery, Florent Giroux are usually the leading riders in the fall. Now, those guys will still win some races in the spring, but things get spread out a bit. So I've rambled at length on there. I'm not sure. I'm sorry that was a kind of a long-winded answer, but rather than just keep going, I'll send it back to you guys, and we can cover any more parts of it in detail.
You hit on a bunch of things. You hit on a bunch of things I want to follow up on for sure. But here's a specific question first. You talked a bit about the jockeys to look for. Have you noticed over the years certain meets, shorter meets, I feel like in particular, there'll be certain shippers coming in from one track or another who outperform their odds. Now, it's a little bit different. Back in the Polytrack era, obviously, that was a whole other deal. But have you seen in these 3 dirt meets that Keeneland has run, have you seen shippers from any particular place tend to outrun their odds at all, or does it seem like it's a pretty level playing field?
Well, you have, it's a very good question, and Keeneland is very unique in this regard because the meet is so short, and because it comes in the spring, following the winter, where some people are, were in Florida, some people were in Louisiana, some people stayed in Kentucky. You really have a very wide mix of horses converging from different areas. And as a result, it creates some challenges for handicappers because you have to weigh do I like the horse that was 3rd beaten 4 at Gulfstream, or like the horse that was 2nd beaten 2 at Fairgrounds, or the horse that was the 2-length winner at Turfway, So yeah. It's like, that's tough. So generally speaking, what I've found is this, and also I'll cover something else in just a minute, but what I've found is in grass races, I think Gulfstream horses have a decided advantage. I think the best turf horses converge in Florida over the winter, and they tend to do very well. Also, comebackers do very well on the grass at Keeneland in the spring. There's a lot of them that take time off over the winter. Maybe they just train down south, but it seems like comebackers are often quite ready on the turf. And even in dirt races, you'll see a lot of it. This is a very prestigious meet, and people want to have their horses ready. It's a place to be seen. It's a place to really, where everyone's focused on it. So you'll have some very good comebacking horses that, whereas you might have given one if you were down south, they're planning on having them ready. So that's one thing that I significantly note is the fact that you're going to see more layoff winners than you would at a typical meet. And of course, as I mentioned, Gulfstream is very tough on the turf. On the dirt, I think you see a fairly even split between Fairgrounds and Gulfstream. Maybe a slight advantage to Gulfstream horses, but by the same token, I think they're going to be a little lower in odds, generally speaking. As far as Turfway horses, I think they're best avoided, except for in cases of the lower level races, because they're not as badly outclassed there. So if you're talking a 10 claimer or you're talking the low end maiden claimer, those are the kind of races when the Turfway horse has its shot. And even then, because they've been running on the synthetic poly track at Turfway, you want to demand some degree of dirt form if you can.
For my own handicapping this Keeneland meet, I plan on paying a lot of attention to the grass racing. And whenever I zero in on a meet, especially the grass races at a particular meet, I try to figure out something about, I don't even want to call it bias, but I want to say the configurations of the turf courses sometimes favor different runners inside or outside, depending particularly on things like where turf rails might be placed, things like that. When you think about this Keeneland turf course, are there any particular elements like that come up beyond the obvious of, you know, not wanting to be hung way outside in a two-turn turf race? Is there anything in particular about the Keeneland turf courses that handicappers should be aware of?
Well, I'm not one of these guys that put a big emphasis on rail placement. I just tend to focus more on the past performances of the race itself. I might like a speed horse because it's the lone speed, or there isn't a lot of speed in the race, but I'm not the type to say it's going to bet a speed horse because the rails are out or something like that. I just that's not really my thing, so I tend to steer clear of that. One thing I will say about Keeneland that's just slightly different than, say, most traditional tracks, although this has changed a little bit, like Churchill Downs, for example, is a mile in circumference, so the turf course is usually a furlong less than that, or 7/8. So Keeneland is a mile and a 16th, so its turf course is roughly, I guess, 7.5 furlongs. So a mile race, therefore, you have a slightly shorter run to the first turn than you would at, say, Churchill Downs for that same race, right? So that puts the outside horses, that gives them a little less time to tuck over. Now that, you know, at a track like Belmont or Aqueduct or Gulfstream, that has a wider circumference to their dirt track, that, it's different than, they're in the kind of the same boat. But of course, those tracks tend to move their rails quite a bit. So beyond that, what tends to happen, I think, is last spring we saw Chad Brown just was unstoppable. I think he had like 8 winners off the top of my head. I can look it up specifically, but he had a great meet. You traditionally see guys like Graham Motion do real well, Bill Mott, guys like that. You tend to see a lot of horsemen from the East Coast fare real well in the races in Keeneland on the grass.
It's a loaded card tomorrow. I think we should talk a few specifics a little bit later in the show. We're going to go into depth on the Madison and the Bluegrass. Certainly do want your quick thoughts on those, but first let me ask you, is there a particular race tomorrow or a particular horse that you're looking forward to betting?
Oh, well, of course, everything is, relative to the odds that they go off, so that's part of it. But I guess I have a couple. I like Cherry Wine in the Bluegrass. I know that it's a wide open race, but I kind of really like the fact of, I like his morning line, though. I'm hearing more and more people picking him, so I think he could end up dropping. I think he's 12-1 or something. But I liked his run when he was 4th in the Rebel, which was, I thought, one of the better Derby preps. And I think Zulu will be heavily backed So I like Cherry Wine in the Bluegrass. I think Bye Bye Bernie is a horse that could be a big price in the Turf Sprint that they have going on tomorrow. Ready for Rye is running in the Commonwealth. That's another horse that I like. So those are just a few off the top of my head. And Dan, the Go-To Man. I love that name in the opener. It's another horse that I like.
Excellent. Well, thank you for walking us through, giving us some ideas. If you want to read Byron's full analysis for Saturday's card, you can check it out on drf.com or print it in the paper. Are you going to be doing the analysis every day through the meet, or is that something that you'll be going back and forth with Marty on?
No, it'll be, I'm the analysis man, and Marty does more. I tend to handle more of the handicapping kind of related stories in the analysis, and Marty does more of the personal interest kind of stories. And so that's kind of how we break things up. So, but Marty's picks always appear under Hermes, and so people can always back Marty's picks, and Marty comes up with some gems now and then, so he's definitely worth following too.
Excellent. Mike, you have anything else for Byron before we let him go and move on to the next segment of the show here?
I just had one odd thing that I wanted to mention, Byron. You may or may not have noticed Kieran McLaughlin's stats recently at Keeneland, and they're striking if you divide the runners between stakes races and other races, so the maiden special weights and allowance races essentially versus stakes races. In the non-stakes races in the last 5 years at Keeneland, he's 18 for 30, 60% winners. Okay,
that's pretty amazing.
That is
time frame on that. I'm sorry.
Last 5 years.
Last 5 years. Gotcha.
Okay. Last 5 years. So in that same time, with stakes runners, so stakes or graded stakes, he's 0 for 23 with 2 seconds and 4 thirds.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
And many of these take money. So my question for you is, and for both of you, I guess, is there noise here? Is it like bet them when they're maidens or allowance, but fade them when they're in stakes races? Or is this the sort of thing that both sides are naturally going to start reverting to the mean?
I would say it's going to revert to the mean on some of this. Well, certainly. I mean, you can't maintain 60% in anything. No. I mean, that's just, you just can't maintain it.
And I'll say this. I'll say this too. On dirt, 11 for 13.
Yeah. Well, here is the thing. Now, obviously, what I will say this though is it is not a completely fluky statistic in that. Okay, if you think about who he trains for. His primary clients are Darley, Shadwell, both of which have big farms in Lexington. So this is a place to be seen. So this is obviously a meet that they gear up for and is very important to them. Not that it's not important to other people too, but this is a meet that is a showcase meet for them. And also, they're blessed with very highly talented, well-bred horses. So they're coming in. They're not bringing over some obscure sire you never heard of that's running in some oddball race. They're bringing over some serious horses. And I've also noticed too with some of the McLaughlin winners over the years is some have come by way of Aqueduct. So which you don't see as many of those. You tend to see more of a migration northward for Keeneland, but you do see them on the show up at Keeneland. So I would say that 60% will be hard to maintain, but I would still expect him to win well above the norm in allowance races, given his stock, his skill as a trainer, and the importance that it has for his primary owners. Now, as far as the stakes races, I think that's partially a function of just how tough it is to win stakes races here. This is not an easy place to come and win and, hit some of those losses, who's to say? I mean, I would say every trainer probably has a lower win percentage in stakes than they would, or not every trainer, that's overstating it, but the vast majority have a lower win percentage in stakes than they probably do in everyday races because of just the sheer talent of the field. But I would have to think that if I liked his horse in a particular race, I wouldn't be necessarily counting him out just because of that record in a stakes race, because, I mean, he can obviously win stakes. We've seen him win plenty in other places. I would say that is a little bit of just bad luck.
Yeah,
I think great analysis on both sides of that equation. Byron, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you coming on. We'd love to get we'll have to get more of the Lexington team on the podcast at some point, and we'd be honored if you would join us again. It's always a pleasure.
Well, I would love to be back on, so just, you know the number, so just call me up.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Byron King, ladies and gentlemen. Again, check out his analysis in daily racing form. And we've got, what do we have? We got about 25 minutes left on the show, maybe 27 minutes left. We want to talk about these public handicapper races, and I think we want to talk a little bit more maybe about this Aqueduct card, given who our next guest is. First, let me check and make sure he's on the line. Nick, are you there? Well, maybe he's not here yet. Mike, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay, good. So let me find Nick. Well, and will you know when he shows up through the magic of the technology here?
I may. If he dials in and uses the code, I will see him appear. It actually looks like he is dialing in right now, so he should be on. He should be on shortly. While we're waiting for him, I'll follow up what I was saying about McLaughlin, and it extends not to Keeneland but the whole state of Kentucky. Do you want to guess, Pete, when the last winner, stakes race, Kieran McLaughlin won in the state of Kentucky?
I can think of a couple, but they were 5 or 6 years ago. There's got to be something since then.
No.
Oh, that is who? What was the one? What is it?
The last winner was at Churchill in 2010 in the Commonwealth, Yankee Fortune.
Right. No, I remember that horse.
You want to guess the last dirt winner he's had in Kentucky? And of course they had synthetic for a little while, so it's going to go back to Churchill.
Unless it's the last 3 meets, you're going back 8 years, aren't you?
Right, but he's 0 for 23 in the last 3 meets, so we know it's not the last 3 meets.
You're talking to the state of Kentucky, or it's Keeneland specifically?
The whole state of Kentucky.
Okay, so that does mean something because of the presence of a little racetrack called Churchill Downs. So
yes.
What's the answer?
Flashy Bull in the 2007 Stephen Foster.
Flashy Bull. Well, clearly it's as well as he does in the state. The graded stakes have not been kind to Mr. McLaughlin. But that to me is I'm with Byron. If it tells you anything, it tells you how hard a lot of these stakes races are at a place like Keeneland.
It's got to revert sooner or later, I think.
Yeah, there's no I could pretty much guarantee you there's no magic to those numbers.
Well, Nick is on, so welcome, Nick.
Thank you, guys. How are you?
Oh, we should. I was going to do a whole introduction, but that's okay.
Please do.
I had all this florid prose written, and now you guys have ruined it. But
you did such a wonderful one for Byron. I think Nick deserves one as well. Pete.
I just want to say that it's my great pleasure to introduce one of the sharper handicappers around, a tremendous Twitter follow. What is your proper Twitter handle, Nick, so people can make sure to be following you?
It's at NTAMM1215.
That is what I was going to guess, but
then
I was thinking I was conflating that with your email, so I decided not to do it myself.
Which is the same thing, so yeah.
So fantastic Twitter follow. Covers racing in New York daily, up there with the very best of them. I didn't want to say better than anybody, just in case that might offend any of our mutual friends, Nick. But right there with anybody. And we've been meaning to have you on the show for a while, and now we finally got you. Another thing that people might not know about Nick that's pretty interesting is he's also part of the Beyer team making speed figures. Now, how's that been progressing for you, Nick?
That's been great. It's my first year, so I started in January and went through Andy's rigorous training for the month of December, which
Boot camp.
was exactly that was boot camp. And like I think many of the people that are involved and have been for quite some time, I'm working on some of the lesser circuits, if you want to look at it that way, but some of the racetracks that maybe don't quite generate the same amount of handle, but still have enough people watching and playing along. So right now I'm making figures for Mahoning Valley and Fauner, and next week will be the big start of it. My big track for the rest of the year is Finger Lakes. So
there you go.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun.
Fauner, a regular haunt of our mutual friend Jonathan Kinchin, right?
Exactly, Grand Island, Nebraska, yeah.
Yeah, he goes out there from time to time. They recognize him there and expect him to give winners whenever he walks in the door. I
just wanted to go there and talk about how good the buyer figures are.
I think you can count on that. He's not with us today. He, I think, is in the dusty room in Chicago, getting ready to play in this Hawthorne tournament. Another credit of yours, Nick, that I wanted to acknowledge before we start talking about this races is you've won 6 figures in a single handicapping contest, something that, the list of people who've done it's growing, but it's not all that large. This is when you were 4th, was it, in the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge 2 years ago. So folks want to listen to you not only for your opinions on the New York circuit and your knowledge of speed figures, but also because you know a thing or two about handicapping contests.
Exactly, because one day I got it all right.
All right, let's talk about these races because we don't have a ton of time. I want to make sure we wrap a couple of minutes early today because we have Keeneland to look at today, and we've also got the New York Mets opening day. So it's a big sporting day here in the in my bunker in Brooklyn. But let's start off. Which race should we start with here, Mike? What's the first race in the sequence of the public handicapper race?
I believe it's the Madison.
Okay,
race
excellent.
9 at Keeneland, yeah.
So we already we talked before. Actually, no, that was on. I'm conflating. We did a webinar which folks should check out with the great Stephen Christ, and we talked about this pick 4 that's happening between Aqueduct and Keeneland. We'll be covering many of, if not all of the same races throughout the course of this show, but folks should definitely check that out. Always a pleasure to hear what Stephen Christ has to say. And we talked about in this race that there are apparently going to be a couple of scratches. Number 1, Cavorting is not going to be participating, and also number 11, 13 Arrows is out. Nick, as our guest, we're going to let you go first. What is your general opinion on the Madison, the first of the publichandicapper.com races?
I'll tell you, you couldn't have envisioned a better running of this race. I mean, just very, very strong from top to bottom, and nice given the distance that it's being used by a couple of horsemen for horses that I think almost certainly will end up going a little bit longer down the line. Sheer Drama and Stop Charging Maria, who little did I think many realize actually both began their 2015 campaign sprinting. So this is something that ended up working out pretty well for both of them, as they accounted for, I think, 4 grade 1s total between the two of them, including the Breeders' Cup Distaff. And, with Cavorting coming out now, Sheer Drama has the rail. I'm a big fan. I think this is going to be a good spot, especially price-wise. She is likely, I think, to drift up a little bit, although I'm at a bit of a loss for exactly how this race is going to be bet. And I think it's one of those where a little bit Breeders' Cup style, when it's so competitive, you're going to have people going in so many different directions that, I mean, is it going to be altogether shocking if we have a 4-1 or a 9-2 type favorite in this race? I think that's almost likely, and I think that would mean that Sheer Drama would offer some value. So that's where she's going to have to work out a trip from the inside. But basically, I want the cutbacks. I want Sheer Drama, Bird at the Wire, Stop Charging Maria to a lesser extent, and we'll also use Wavell Avenue and Dancing House, who Wavell Avenue coming off the layoff off the big win in the Breeders' Cup, and Dancing House, whose Barbara Fritchie was not only was it validated with some comeback performances from also rans, but it was very strong, and it feels like to me with each watching of it, I like it a little bit more.
Mike, where did you end up in here?
There's a couple. I'm kind of with Nick on this, not necessarily on Sheer Drama, but I do think that there's going to be a bit of a pace. So I'm looking at one of the cutback horses in particular. I like Bird at the Wire, who I think is primarily a sprinter and especially a 7-furlong sprinter. She's going to need a little bit of pace to rally into, but if she gets it, I think she'll be there and running late. She seems to be working well in off the bit of a layoff. I don't think she's as good 2 turns, so I'm glad they're cutting her back here, and she'll be a good price. There's another one I mentioned on the webinar with Steve Christ that I like a bit, which is number 10, Super Majesty, making her first start as a 4-year-old following, kind of a draw line through it effort in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. This is a brilliant horse who started off just a nose away from being undefeated in her first 4 starts, and that one nose loss came going 2 turns. I think that she's another one that's primarily a sprinter, and she could be sitting second or third maybe and work out a good trip at a nice price.
Nick, when you're looking at this race, is your inclination to attack it in a multi-race wager like the Big Apple Bluegrass Pick 4, or are you more interested in diving into the vertical pools like the Exacta, Trifecta, Superfecta?
A little bit of both. It feels as if so many serial wagers are have this race right in the middle of it, including the blue. I don't know if we have a clever name for this bluegrass. I think it's Bluegrass Big Apple.
Bluegrass Big Apple. Yep.
Oh, yeah. I've been saying it backwards. Leave it to me to put New York first, but that's
of course. Well, I mean, look, Aqueduct's the hub, so always we were going to look for that to be the. I'll play that. I think we're going to talk about some of those races, of course, and then there are obviously serial wagers at Keeneland. But this is a scenario where, depending on how you approach an intra-race play, I think you're kind of obligated to try something because of the wide open board. And if you like a horse like Sheer Drama, this is a scenario where I'll more than likely play a trifecta keying Sheer Drama with 2 or 3 horses that I like most for the greatest amount, and then we'll also use some backup horses, so to speak, in the trifecta as well, and basically try and situate it so that if Sheer Drama runs first or second and the other horses that I like fill out the rest of the ticket, then I can hit the trifecta a couple of times, because I think there's just too much value here to pass on it. And if she ends up being the 8 or 10 to 1 that I'm hopeful for, I'll probably throw a couple of dollars to win too.
In the webinar we did with Stephen Christ, he made a really good case, thinking like Connections, for why Enchanting Lady is going to be as cranked as possible to run big. The 2 times she's gone longer than 6.5 furlongs haven't worked out so well for her. Nick, do you see her as one who can get the 7 and make an impact here?
She's a bit of a mystery to me, and the comeback race was good. I think she certainly faced some decent horses that day, but having seen her just when she's been outside of California, East Coast bias, I guess, guy that I am, I never really thought much of her. And her Jersey Girl was a good effort, but Cavorting was so in control of that race from start to finish. And the Victory Ride was this odd race where she seemed to be having trouble either with kickback or being inside or something. She angled out to the middle of the track and started running again, which didn't really make much sense. So, Baffert shipped Fantastic Style to Keeneland last year for the Beaumont, and she was very, very average and came back and basically has run clearly her 3 best races of her life. I just don't know if these horses are as comfortable, some of his types that want to sprint outside of California, given that they can't really do a lot of the same stuff they can in Southern California, which is just run a lot of these horses off their feet. I think she's up against it a bit with Sunday Rules and Super Majesty being to her outside. Granted, with 13 Arrows coming out, maybe it's not quite as quick a race early, but it feels like it's going to be a little too fast for a horse who's going to be chasing.
Let's move on. Mike, what race should we do next? Should we go in time order, or should we stay at Keeneland? What do you think?
I don't know. I wonder if Jonathan Kinchin is possibly on and can maybe chime in with any of his thoughts in the Madison.
What, is he crashing now?
I think so.
Well,
Jonathan?
Look. I got to the place. I got handicapped. I'm about to go all in at Keeneland in the first race, which is I'm sure is gonna make Nick extremely excited.
You goofball.
And so I just wanted to say hi and say that I like Dancing House as well, but I'll let you guys stay to the grind because in a minute I'm gonna have to start checking probables and run away. So.
Well, so if we only have you for a minute, let's just very quickly see if you have you looked? Are you aware of the races that are in this Big Apple Bluegrass Pick 4, as I'm calling it, even though I know that's not really the name?
I am. Well, I didn't look at the Bayshore yet, so I don't have anything about that.
I just wanted your best bet from the sequence, your strongest opinion from those 4 races, and then we'll let you go handicap.
Bird at the Wire.
Bird at the Wire, who Mike Hogan also mentioned. Very interesting. 15-1 on the morning line. Definitely one to take a look at in what looks like a loaded running of the Madison. All right, you go do your thing. But you got to tell us, though, no one in the contest is going to hear this. It'll air after the race happens. Who are you going all in on so we know to root for or against you, depending on our inclination?
So I have 2 entries, $400 each. I'm going to play all $800 on pick threes, singling the 4 in the first. The Wesley Ward is 3-5 right now, and then hoping that I beat the Maker in the second, and then just using 3 horses in the third leg. And if I can hit that, even if it's for a small return, I'll have it on one ticket. I'll be at somewhere between $1,600 to $2,400, depending on how it comes back.
Some contest fans may be confused going all in on a pick 3 in a contest. Hawthorne is one of the few contests, along with Canterbury, I believe, that allow multi-race wagers and enable a player like Jonathan to do that. Jonathan, best of luck to you in there. You can hang around and listen, but we won't call on you anymore. You can be obnoxious and chime in if you want, but you're basically free to do your own thing from this point on. And my next question is for Nick. What do you think of that strategy of being so aggressive, especially on a short price horse early in a live bankroll tournament? Do you see where Jonathan's coming from, or does it make your teeth itch?
Both. The phrase "all in" out of Jonathan's mouth at a live money contest always makes me a little nervous, but he's a far more aggressive player than I am. I have actually never played the Hawthorne tournament, and do believe, based on what I've seen and the people I've spoken to about it, that it is one where you need to look to make a splash. So I'm not necessarily saying you should bet 3 or 4, whatever the buy-in is, to win on a horse in the first race, but you basically need to test your entire bankroll pretty early, and then see if you can get to a certain level and then kind of coast and sort of play patsy with everybody else, and if you need a couple of hundred, you can make a couple of hundred. But I do think that's a pretty good strategy. I also liked what Jonathan did last August, and I would have liked it even if he didn't hit the ticket and if there hadn't been a disqualification in the Beverly D, because he really zoned in on that pick 5 sequence at Arlington on Million Day and spent all of his money on 2 entries on that. And I think that was really intelligent, because it was a super wide open sequence, and you could legitimately take $700 or $800, whatever the number was, and play it in that, like a lot of people did at the racetrack themselves. And it just so happened that it earned him basically the NHC Tour. So I think that the versatility of the Hawthorne tournament gives you those options, and that's nice.
Yeah, and I think that I don't think I'm going on a limb to say part of why Jonathan's being so aggressive is with the idea of he's already got his 2 seats. He's playing in this thing for tour points. He needs wins are what he needs. Even a third in a contest like this, that might not end up on his scoreboard at the end of the year on the NHC Tour, where it's all about your 6 best scores. So if anybody's in a position to be aggressive, he is, because it suits what his goal is, and it also fits his natural style. So we'll have to see what happens. Who knows? Maybe now I'm getting a crazy idea to make the pod a little longer than I thought. We'll watch this race at Keeneland live on the pod, and we'll see how Jonathan's pick 3 does here in the first leg. We'll see how we feel in a few minutes.
I'm game. I'm game if you want to keep going. We got 21 minutes to post. So,
I don't want to keep Nick that long. You got other important things to do. But let's get through the public handicapper races, and then we'll see where we are.
Let's do it. Let's switch over to Aqueduct. It's race 10. It's the next race in post-time order. It's at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. The Wood Memorial. And Nick, you're the Aqueduct guy, so you started last time. Let's have you start again.
Well, thanks. This is I was actually talking to Steve Bick this morning about this Wood Memorial, and it's as competitive a Wood Memorial as I remember, and that has, I think, every bit to do with the fact that we just don't have any standouts in this division, and it's just specifically in this region of the 3-year-old division. Shagaf is a horse that I joked with Steve that nerds like me in 4 or 5 years will be sitting at dinner and wondering about who the favorite was in the Wood Memorial, and we'll say, "Oh, that's right, it was Shagaf," and we'll laugh. And I don't mean to demean him so much, but at this point, Shagaf is just a barely slightly above average horse. He's not particularly impressive on any type of measurable speed figure, and the Gotham was probably the second best 3-year-old race run that weekend at Aqueduct. So I'm actually quite confident of that. So I'm not going to go out on a limb at all for a horse like Shagaffin. And I picked Matt King Cole. He's a horse that I like. I'm not over the moon necessarily about betting him. I think that he is in an advantageous position given the speed that he has and the fact that he should be able relatively easily to get clear of everybody inside of him. But I think the race boils down to what outwork is asked to do early by John Velasquez. If he pressures Matt King Cole from the outside, this thing could get a little bit quicker than both would prefer, and I think that opens the door to everybody else. If I was looking at it from a contest perspective, I'd be taking either Tale of Saval or Flexibility. I think that both are very, very live. I hated the ride that Flexibility got in the Withers, where his jockey almost ripped his face off going to the first turn and really rated him into submission. And I think it was one of those scenarios where the more races you watch, the more you try and become in tune with trip handicapping, you realize that when horses are overly rated like that, they very oftentimes just turn themselves off. And that kind of felt like what happened with Flexibility. Now he's had a bit of time off. I hope they're conservative with him early, let those two hopefully battle a bit, and then go ahead and make a run. And Tale of Saval second off a layoff, given the trip that he had at Tampa, where he was abused at the start and then ended up rallying up what seems like it was a bit of a dead rail that day. I could see him running an improved race, especially if he can get a little bit more involved early.
Mike, where did you end up in here?
It's funny, Nick sees the race almost identically to the way I do. I don't like Shagaff at all, especially at the price he's going to be, and I think Matt King Cole is the most likely winner, but I don't think he's one I would be willing to bet at the price that I'm expecting to be. In fact, I tweeted out earlier in the week, Matt King Cole is this year's Bellamy Road. Not to say that I think he's going to win by 17 and equal the track record, so much as I think he's a horse he's on some people's radar, but he doesn't have any Derby points yet. He's not on the top of the list of the Derby contenders, but I think he's going to have a huge effort in the Wood and come into the Derby as overbet. That was sort of the comparison I made and why I mentioned Bellamy Road. That said, I think he could potentially lose. I don't think he's a lock here, and I think Nick is absolutely right that in terms of the value, I think Flexibility is certainly better than he showed last race, and I think Tale of Saval can move forward in the second start off of what was a bit of a long layoff, and I think there's some upside to him.
Do you think, Nick, you were talking about the race, in a way, John Velasquez maybe holds the key to the race. From watching him all the time, do you see him trying to settle off Matt King Cole, or do you see him maybe trying to use his speed and clear from that outside post?
I think he'll sit outside. I think this is the coveted Todd Pletcher, John Velasquez outside stalking trip. Given the way Todd trains a lot of these horses, almost always in tandem, and swapping out who's inside and who's outside, Todd Pletcher horses win from everywhere, but it has always felt as if the outside pressing trip is the one that most of his horses are most comfortable with, and it certainly is the trip that John Velasquez is most comfortable with. So it was an ideal draw. Outwork is an interesting horse because I'm sure the Wood is on the short list of races Mike Repole wants to win most. So this is by no means.
He said as much.
Right, exactly, yeah. So he says he still has demons to exercise from 5 years ago. So
Uncle Mo, yeah.
Exactly. So, it's a situation where, this horse is virtually his child, given that it's a homebred with these kind of connections being out of Nona Mia. So Outlook probably only needs to run third to get into the Derby. He'd certainly get in with the second place finish, but they're certainly going to be trying to get it done. And he'll be dangerous with that outside stalking trip, especially if he applies enough pressure to Matt King Cole to soften him up just a little bit.
Another very clever example of thinking like connections. Let's move along. We've got two other 3-year-old races to talk about, and then if we have a time, I want to just talk to Nick really fast about the Aqueduct card in general. But let's talk about the Bluegrass. Mike, we're going to make you go first on this one. It's a 1.8 miles for 3-year-olds at Keeneland. It's $1 million allowance race in a way. Where are you landing here?
Well, Nick kind of tipped the hand a little bit when he mentioned the Gotham not being the best 3-year-old race the week of that weekend. I think he was referring to the optional claimer that was run on that Sunday where Matt King Cole beat My Man Sam. Matt King Cole, of course, going in the wood, My Man Sam going to the bluegrass. I think My Man Sam is probably the most likely winner. I think we talked about it a little on the webinar. I think 10-1 morning line is a bit optimistic. Maybe half of that is more likely. 6-1 seems like more than a fair price to me on My Man Sam. And I don't really trust any of the three Pletcher runners. Blinkers go on for Zulu as a 5-2 favorite. That's just not a move that Pletcher does with consistency, or it doesn't give me confidence when he does that in graded stakes. He's just 2 for 21 in the last 5 years, and only only 4 others hit the board. So I don't trust that. I don't know if Donegal Moon is quite as good as he showed last out when he earned a 99 buyer at Parx, beating 4 rivals. I think he's probably more like what we saw in his 5th place finish in either the Remsen or the Withers, which maybe is good enough to beat this field, but at 5-1 or thereabouts, I don't really completely trust him. So I want a price in here. The other one I really like is number 5, Crescent Drive, who I think can step forward in the second start off a layoff, or in the second start as a 3-year-old for Tom Amoss.
Nick, are you seeing that line of reasoning that My Man Sam is the most likely winner in this race?
Yeah, I do. I do feel that way. You know, and I think it's a situation where had he been in the 5, I think there's a pretty good shot he'd be the favorite.
Right.
You know, and I by no means would he be 8-5 or so, but you know, we know what kind of support these connections generally get, and you know, that was My Man Sam's an interesting horse, and Chad Brown, you know, being familiar with Chad Brown, especially now in the last 5 years or so when his barn has really emerged as one of the top in the country, there are horses that he will gradually work into shape and get into shape, and horses that he will burn a race with. And My Man Sam clearly was that type of horse. He didn't want to go the distance that he was asked to first time out. That ended up being a relatively productive race, and then came back and then just had this virtually jaw-dropping performance going 2 turns. And then not only did he validate, he took a step forward in running second to Matt King Cole as the only horse who made an off-the-pace move in that race. So, you know, with the outside post, with horses immediately to his inside that are going to be closer than him, I don't think it'll be a big problem. He's the horse to beat, to me, clearly. I think you have to kind of play the pace scenario and look at horses that are going to be good prices, like Crescent Drive, who Mike brought up, who I think is dangerous now, getting to dirt for the first time. There's a little bit of dirt in the second family in this Eugene Melnick pedigree. I'm not a big Cherry Wine fan. I'm going to give Cherry Wine one more shot. I thought that he did a little running in garbage time in the Rebel, probably was a little farther back than he needed to be, and I just think they're going to fly in here. I mean, I frequently overrate, I think, how much speed there's going to be in a race because I find myself betting too many closers, but I think they're really going to move. I mean, between Looking for a Kiss on the inside and Twiz and Lauban and Zulu and even Goatstown has a little bit of speed, American Dubai and Cards of Stone. I mean, there are potentially 6 or 7 speed horses in this race, and I think if you like horses like the ones we've laid out, you're expecting them to go pretty fast.
And Donegal Moon's win at Keeneland came when he wired the field. I'm with you, Nick. I think there's speed here.
I think we'd be remiss, especially talking about potentially the best closer in this race, not to mention Brody's Cause. Nick, are you willing to forgive, as I am, that effort at Tampa last time?
Here's my Brody's Cause concern. Dale Romans has obviously done very well in the 3-year-old ranks over the years. I can't remember really at all a horse that he was so deliberately conservative with as a 3-year-old. Given the way that this horse ran last time and the way that Dale sort of kept passing every opportunity to bring him back, I'm not certain that Brody's Cause is exactly, well, he doesn't need to be made of iron to win this race, but he might be the type of horse that's a little behind and maybe, you know, not quite where he needs to be to win a race like this. I know the reports are that he's training quite a bit better, but I remember the reports were that he was training pretty well before the race in Tampa. So I'm going to use him defensively in a multi-race type play, but I think if you're betting horses like My Man Sam and you're playing exactas or trifectas with some of the horses that we've laid out, you're trying to beat Brody's Cause altogether.
Let's move on to the West Coast and the Santa Anita Derby, the third of our big 3 Triple Crown prep races on this loaded Saturday of racing. We're talking, of course, about the Santa Anita Derby, a mile and an eighth. Mike, will you start us off for this one, too? Who's the winner of the Santa Anita Derby?
Well, for me, there's going to be a little bit more speed than we saw in the San Felipe because you've got a couple sprinters stretching out in Denman's Call and Iron Rob. I see them as probably just more pace rivals than real contenders at going this distance. I don't think they want to be here. I don't think they want to go that far. I think they're just trying to see if they're really that good and fit with this level. I'm betting that they don't. I know there's another horse in here that's strictly using this as a prep. Janet Armstrong came right out and said that Dresden Hermes is not going to be running in the Kentucky Derby, is going to be running in a turf stakes race on the Derby undercard. So she's getting a race into him. So that really leaves it with 7 contenders in my book. And for me, there's really 2 that it boils down to. And unfortunately, it's probably your 2 most likely favorites in here. It's which do you get a better price on with More Spirit and Dancing Candy? I think Dancing Candy is going to have a little more pace pressure than he had in the last start. We'll see how he reacts to that, if he sits off or if he tries to run them off their heels again. Either way, it's not a race I'm looking to bet necessarily. It's more a race I'm looking to watch because I think whoever runs big here is very likely going to be the second choice and possibly even favored in the Kentucky Derby, especially if Dancing Candy puts down another triple-digit buyer in there. So it's one of those 2 for me, and really just sit back and watch the race.
So for Mike, this is one to watch, not to bet. How about you, Nick? Do you see money of yours passing through the windows for this year's Santa Anita Derby?
Probably not, just because I can't add really anything to what Mike said about Dancing Candy and More Spirit. More Spirit is the type of horse that he's atypical of a Bob Baffert horse to me in that he's a little bit more of a grinding, closing type. I've not really been terribly impressed with his 2 races this year. Maybe I'm holding him to a higher standard than I should be because I really did expect him to take a big step forward as a 3-year-old, given that he ran so well in the Kentucky Jockey Club and in the Los Al Futurity. Is Bob Lewis, he ran down 2 horses that to me were stretched out sprinters and sort of did it with ideal circumstances in kind of workmanlike fashion. And then I was surprised it took him so long to get to Exaggerator for second in the San Felipe. So, maybe it was one of those where he's just kind of getting himself back into tip-top shape. And I do hope, I hope that Dancing Candy gets a little bit more pressure in the early stages and almost wonder, and I'm not some kind of conspiracy theorist or coming on here, but I almost wonder if the intention is to send Denman's Call maybe to test out Dancing Candy to see his ability to rate going into the Derby, given the common connections between Denman's Call and likely Derby favorite Nyquist. I'm going to be willing to look like a fool in what I'm about to say, but I'm giving Exaggerator another chance. And my Exaggerator angle is everybody has labeled Exaggerator as a sprinter. And don't get me wrong, there's a very good chance that Exaggerator is just a sprinter and needs to be cut back. But there's also something common about every route race he's run in his life, and that's that Kent Desormeaux has asked him to move in the middle of every single one. He has not been allowed to settle and make one run. If this is truly a race where the pace is strong and Dancing Candy gets some pressure early, it could set up perfectly for a horse that just lags back and makes one run. Now, that horse may be More Spirit, and More Spirit may end up just being better than Exaggerator at a mile and an eighth, but I'm just not quite writing him off yet. I eventually will make money with Exaggerator. Maybe it'll be in the King's Bishop, because that's ultimately what he should have been doing all along.
How's that look?
But he gets one more chance from me. This is it. This is the time for him to really put it all together. I go back and watch the San Felipe, and I'm almost brought to tears because he's sitting so perfectly at the back of the pack when Dancing Candy's taking pressure, and then all of a sudden he's making this giant middle move into the race and then asked to kind of prolong it as he gets a little bit bumped at the quarter pole and then ultimately falls short. So still, the concern is there about him being a sprinter. I'm not going to be surprised if that's the case, but he gets one more chance from me.
That's a great point. I mean, we see time and time again horses who don't distribute their energy in an even way can't run their best race. I think that's certainly was the case with Exaggerator last time. My fear is there was a Desormeaux quote after the race to the effect of, yeah, well, I think he really just wants a mile, but we'll try him one more time. But, sometimes with trainer quotes like that, you got to let the actions speak louder than the words. My bigger concern, I guess, with Exaggerator is do we think the morning line is right here about 4-1? Personally, I'd want a little bit. I'd want a little bit longer than that. Would you play him down to that morning line, Nick?
Yeah, no, I would definitely want more than that too. I would need probably close to double that. But I do. I mean, I read the Keith Desormeaux quote, and the thing that came to my mind, and now that you've brought it up, I can say it. And with due respect to my neighbors to the east, as I sit in Texas, it would be very surprising of a good Cajun boy to say something like that and not be telling the truth, right?
I love it. I love it. One horse I just want to mention. I cannot make you a logical case for this horse, but if you were in a contest situation and you needed to go long here, I happened to be there in the paddock the day of the San Felipe. I was super duper impressed just visually as an athlete with number 5 Smoky Image. He did not run. I did not really see a reason why he didn't run other than possibly being just very outclassed. But when you're looking at a horse that could be a legitimate 12 or 15 to 1 in a contest situation, like especially a mythical money contest situation, sometimes an angle like that, hey, I like this horse as an athlete, can be enough to use a horse at that price. But I can't really make the case on paper for him. But I did want to just mention him to the listeners as a possible long shot to maybe throw in there.
And I'm guessing Victor's going to be a little more aggressive with him than he was in the San Felipe because he's won on or near the lead or a lot closer than he was, especially the way Dancing Candy ran away with the San Felipe. I don't think they're going to make that same mistake twice. I think they're going to say, okay, if he's good enough, let's put him close and see whether he's good enough because he was kind of up against it the way that race was run.
I wouldn't think that would be the path to victory in this race particularly, but again, at a big enough price, one to think about throwing in, not one to make the play of the day. We have about 2 minutes. The Jonathan Kinchen money has hit the pool. Maybe he decided to bet to win as well because his tip in Keeneland is down to 2-5. But while we wait for that race to go, Nick, I apologize for keeping you longer than I promised, but do you have 2 seconds to talk about the Bayshore before we let you go?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So yeah, this is the other race that we haven't talked about in this Big Four, Pick Four, Big Apple, Bluegrass Pick Four, whatever we're calling it now. Can we get away with going skinny in the Bayshore, or do we have to be creative?
I think you can. It's going to boil down to mainly three 3A horses, so to speak, and then what you want to do in terms of helping them with Awesome Speed and Never Gone South, expecting to come out. You're basically, in my opinion, left with Awesome Gent, Unified, and Cocked and Loaded. There are going to be some Richie the Bull fans that probably feel like he's a horse that you want to use. I sided with Cocked and Loaded of the 3. I thought he'd be the best price, and he's a horse to me that wants to sprint. His Breeders' Cup Juvenile was a very underrated performance, in my opinion, and I guess you could say that cooler heads prevailed in terms of figuring out a spot for this horse to come back and make his 2016 debut. I know there were a couple of route races mentioned, and then ultimately he ended up here the last time. One of his best races of his career was sprinting in the Tremont, and I think that's going to be what he wants to do. Awesome Gent and Unified figured a battle early. Awesome Gent has a little bit of a look to me of an inter-track horse for course. We'll see. We've seen horses like this really jump forward on the inter-track and then not quite be at the same level. And is Unified going to be as good second time out? Jimmy Jerkins is 0 for 11 with second-time starters off of maiden wins in their debuts. It was a decent enough field. The figure is probably a little high, but it's definitely not very high. It was at least a mid-90s type figure. It's been validated so far. So those are the 3 for me. It's going to be King Kranz and Sallisaw, the local horses, in quotations, are going to have to improve, I think, a little bit much to really take down any of those 3.
Mike, you had an interesting stat on Larry Ravelli regarding number 6 Cocked and Loaded, who Nick likes in here. Do you have that at the ready?
I do. I'll get to that in a second. I'll say the Jimmy Jerkins 0 for 11 is true. Last 5 years, second start off a maiden win, but 6 in the money finishes. So 4 seconds, 2/3. Maybe there's a little bit of bad luck in there. The other thing I noted with Jimmy Jerkins is you want to guess how many times he's gone, not from a debut maiden win, but from any maiden win into a graded stakes race in the last 5 years?
I wouldn't be surprised if the number is 0.
It's actually 1, and it's the best horse he's had in the last 5 years. Wicked Strong is the only one he's put into a graded stakes following a maiden win. So makes me think that Jimmy really likes this one. Obviously, the figure bears it out, but It's interesting nonetheless. I don't know if I trust him as a lone A in a short field at a short price, but I think he's going to be a good horse long term. So Ravelli, off a layoff of 120 days or more in sprints the last 5 years, he's 31 for 94, 33% win rate, a very solid ROI of $2.40. So I think he's going to have Cocked and Loaded ready to run off the layoff in the Bayshore. And I'm with you, Nick. I think he's the one to play, if not the most likely winner.
All right.
You know, and on that Jimmy Jerkins topic, just real quick, I was thinking about that. And Quality Road was a horse that Unified sort of reminded me of Quality Road looking at the past performances. I think Quality Road got a 98 Beyer speed figure in his debut. I know it was on Cigar Mile Day in 2008, and it was actually the first time I ever qualified for the NHC that day.
Nice.
And then he came back, and I'm almost certain he ran in a one other than at Gulfstream, but I didn't look up his PPs, and so I was thinking of that. And he actually was beaten by There Goes JoJo, who didn't really end up being nearly, of course, the horse that Quality Road was. But I think it goes to, and I remember reading in I'll give you your employer a little bit of a plug there, but and my colleague, as I'm very generous with it, Dave Litfin, wrote in Expert Handicapping, the percentage of first-time starter, of debut winners that buy are over 70, and how much they drop off second time out is just gigantic. I don't have the book in front of me or know exactly. So, and I think it's safe to say Unified is going to regress, if you can regress in just your second start, but it still may end up being good enough. You know, running a 93 or 94 figure in this race against the horses that he's facing, provided that Awesome Jen takes a step back too, could be good enough too. So it makes for a really fun race and a good matchup, even if the field now is going to be shortened to 6.
So I just wanted to let folks know, Jonathan Kinchin's contest streams are alive. Oh, is he there?
Of course.
Big City Dreamin'. Big City
Got a little
Dreamin'
weary at the wire there, Jonathan.
Sent off at what was it, 1 to 5 in the end? Was that your
2 to
money?
5.
Holds on at 4.5 furlongs. If it had been 4 3/4 furlongs, Jonathan's contest hopes would be over, but it was at 4.5 furlongs, and he lives to fight another day. Who do you have? Do you have something fairly cold that folks can follow along with in the rest of this pick 3, or is it big and spready?
I'll just tell you, it's a little bit confusing what I did here, but Nick's gonna love this. I have a $30 pick 3 with the 2 to the 2/8/12. So the
Okay,
2.
let me write this down. 2 with 2/8/12. Got it.
And then I have a $13 pick 3, 6 with 2/8/12.
6 with 2/8/12. Okay.
And then I have like a $170 pick 3, 7 with 2/8/12.
7 with 2/8/12.
$5 pick 3, 5 with 2/8/12. $16 pick 3, 9 with 2/8/12. $25.
You did some math.
$25 pick 3, 11 with 2/8/12.
Use an abacus.
And a $10 pick 3, 12 with 2/8/12. I didn't do any math. Aaron Bilek did the math.
Oh, there's a shock.
Excellent. Oh, man, that's fantastic.
Wish me luck. Love you guys. Bye.
Godspeed. All right. Our party crasher, Jonathan Kinchin, alive at Hawthorne. We'll hear how he did. We'll be back next week with a couple of shows, one on Wednesday, one on Friday. I want to thank our special guest, Byron King, today. I want to thank debut podcast performer Nick Tamero for sharing his always fantastic insights. If you want his full thoughts on the Aqueduct card, go ahead and follow him on Twitter. It's at ntam1215. He'll be putting a link to his full card analysis for Aqueduct. It's must-read stuff for players who follow the New York circuit. Thanks, as always, to Mike Hogan. A reminder to check out the webinar Mike and I did with the legendary Stephen Christ. That should be archived any minute now. You can find that on the DRF YouTube channel, which I believe, Mike, you just correct me if I'm wrong, drf.com/YouTube.
That's correct.
And thanks most of all to all of you for joining us. We'll be back next week on this big weekend of racing. May you win all your photos. 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 May you win all your photos.